Coming up today, South Korea, the United States and Japan hold a video conference to discuss their joint response to North Korea's imminent long-range rocket launch. The Seollal, or Lunar New Year holiday, is almost here, and the exodus out of Seoul is about to begin. Congestion on the nation's expressways will build from this afternoon and peak on Sunday morning. Plus, Spain confirms the first known European case of a Zika-infected pregnant woman who recently returned from travelling to Colombia. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Friday, the 5th of February. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with the latest reaction to North Korea's planned rocket launch. South Korea, the United States and Japan have been thrashing out possible response measures to it. Let's go straight over to Connie Kim, who's standing by for us at Seoul's Defense Ministry. So, Connie, it must be frantic over there, given that this rocket could potentially be launched as soon as next Monday.
That's right, Mark. Working-level defense officials from South Korea, the U.S., and Japan coordinated their response measures to this upcoming rocket launch, holding a closed-door video conference early this morning. Now, this all comes after North Korea on Wednesday notified a UN agency of its plan to launch what it claims is an Earth observation satellite sometime between February 8th and February 25th. Now, that's a 2.5-week window, but experts are struggling to pinpoint when the launch will happen, as most of the facilities and launch area at North Korea's main launch site in Dongchangni are covered up. This is preventing analysts from making more accurate launch estimates since satellite imagery isn't giving them many clues. Also, operations at the site are mostly automated, and rail tracks to the launch site have been set up to ensure rocket components can be transferred back and forth quickly.
Well, yes, it looks like we're going to be in for a period of uncertainty, plus the weather is likely to play a big part as well. But Connie, separate to this video conference between South Korea, the US and Japan, South Korea's defense minister convened an emergency meeting of military and defense-related officials as well.
That's right. Meeting with the nation's most senior military commanders this morning, South Korea's defense chief Han Min-gu ordered the South Korean military to respond actively to the launch. Minister Han also ordered troops to maintain exceptional mental and physical readiness during this pressing and dangerous time. Senior officials from the Defense Ministry and the Joint Chiefs of Staff also discussed response scenarios if debris from the rocket falls on South Korean territory. The ministry indicated on Thursday that shooting it down is one possible option. Regardless, if North Korea forges ahead with this rocket launch, which most people believe it will, the regime will only serve to further isolate itself from the international community. Well, that's all I have for now, Mark. Back to you.
Thank you, Connie, for that report. Now, with the continued threats posed by North Korea, Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se met with the ambassadors from the US, Japan, the European Union and Australia earlier today. They discussed ways to cooperate on dealing with North Korea's nuclear test that happened last month, as well as the most recent announcement of that rocket launch, which most of the world believes to be a ruse for a ballistic missile test. The meeting comes amid predictions the UN Security Council will slap very shortly a new resolution on North Korea for its January 6th nuclear test. An official at Seoul's Foreign Ministry told reporters that the timing of the potential missile launch could actually influence the level of sanctions on Pyongyang for its nuke test, or a separate resolution could be adopted. Now, in other news, the National Assembly passed a contentious corporate revitalization bill on Thursday that had been stalled in Parliament for more than 200 days. The so-called one-shot law is aimed at streamlining the complex process of companies going through structural reforms and making investments. The legislation will also ease procedures for mergers and acquisitions within industries. For more on how this will impact the Korean economy, we have Lee Ji-won, Professor of Economics at Yonsei University, on the line. Professor, we'll get into the potentially negative aspects of this shortly, but can you first tell us how this legislation will benefit local firms?
Yes, as you know, whenever we try to restructure our industries, we usually did it after trouble happened. But this time, this measure is unique because according to this measure, we can help our troubled industry before the accidents take place. So it's a very preemptive measure to assist companies and industries to restructure.
And Professor, the passage of this bill was held up due to opposition from the main opposition party. It claimed until recently that big businesses should be excluded from the bill's benefits, citing the potential for abuse. Is this a legitimate concern?
Well, I think the concern was a little bit too excessive. First of all, we do have lots of regulations and restrictions that are imposed upon large companies. And on top of that, in order to prevent the abusive use of this measure, the National Assembly had imposed a couple of other restrictions. First of all, the National Assembly can send 4 specialists to the committee whether to help a company or not. And another thing is that the target industries to be assisted will be restricted to only those industries that suffer from excessive supply, such as shipbuilding, steel, and petrochemical industry. Based on these kinds of restrictions imposed upon this measure, I think the concern is a little bit too excessive.
Well, the concern is over now because the legislation has been approved. It was so on Thursday. Well, thank you very much for your insights, Professor. That was Lee Ji-won, Professor of Economics at Yonsei University here in Seoul on the recently approved one-shot law. Now it's that time of the year again when families in Korea brave hours on expressways to see their relatives and celebrate the Lunar New Year. The holiday exodus has already begun, with heavy congestion expected to build in the coming hours as people finish work early to try, at least, to get a head start. Han Dan has this report.
More than 36 million people are expected to move across Korea by planes, trains, and automobiles to visit their loved ones starting Friday. The Ministry of Transportation says heavy traffic will begin at around 3 to 4 p.m. Friday, with bumper-to-bumper congestion expected at around 6 p.m. when people start hitting the roads after work. Officials expect the congestion to continue through midnight, peaking on Sunday morning, a day before the Lunar New Year. An estimated 5.3 million people will be heading to their hometowns that day alone. From Seoul, it's expected to take about 2 hours and 40 minutes to Daejeon, 4 hours 30 minutes to Daegu, and 5 hours 20 minutes to Busan on average from Friday to Sunday. Returning traffic is expected to peak on Monday afternoon. While some 2.8 million people are expected to board trains, the Korea Railroad Corporation has deployed about 150 additional KTX bullet trains and 150 regular trains to reduce overcrowding from Monday to Wednesday. With long driving hours ahead, motorists are advised to keep vehicles well ventilated. Coffee or tea always helps to drive away drowsiness, and chewing gum has also been proven effective to help stay alert. Han Dan, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's tax receipts in 2015 hit a surplus for the first time in 4 years. The finance ministry says the country collected roughly $300 billion, putting the gap between revenue and expenditure at around $8 billion. The surplus comes on the back of improved domestic consumption and favorable asset market conditions, coupled with a revised tax law that nearly doubled cigarette prices. However, customs duty slumped by around $180 million after seeing sluggish imports due to plunging oil prices. Income tax revenue from interest rates also dropped as the country's key rate hit a record low of 1.5%. The International Monetary Fund is looking to strengthen precautionary financing instruments to counter the continuing low oil and commodity prices. Speaking in the US on Thursday, IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde called for a stronger global financial safety net in order to limit the negative effects of the low prices and also China's slowdown. She said advanced economies should support growth through infrastructure spending and other steps. Lagarde urged emerging economies to boost non-commodity revenues and allow more flexible exchange rate policies. The IMF chief also suggested the US clearly communicate its plans to raise rates with other countries. And central banks around the world have been devaluing their currencies over recent months to try and keep themselves competitive in terms of international trade. Korea has been no exception, cutting its rate, as we just heard, to a record low 1.5% over the past year or so. And analysts say further cuts could be on the horizon soon. Park Se-young has the details.
The global currency war is intensifying, with central banks in various countries following China's movement to weaken their local currencies. According to Bloomberg, the People's Bank of China cut the yuan midpoint by 0.22% in January after having devalued its local currency by nearly 5% in just 4 days last August. The PBOC did on Thursday raise the yuan fixing by 0.16% to fight off bearish sentiments. The Bank of Japan recently adopted a negative interest rate strategy, which will in effect drive down the yen. The European Central Bank, having rolled out a negative rate policy in 2014, is likely to cut its interest rates again in March. Global investment banks are extending their forecast of the Bank of Korea lowering its benchmark interest rate within the first 3 months of a year. Speculation of a rate cut at this month's policy meeting rose sharply after the BOJ's interest rate announcement, following concerns of a Korean won appreciating against the yen and hurting exporters. Korea's exports shrank 18.5% on-year in January, the biggest drop since 2009. But the country's heavy household debt and the potential of a faster outflow of foreign capital are factors that could prevent the BOK from lowering rates further. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Now, a pregnant woman in Spain has been infected with the Zika virus. Officials say the woman from Catalonia had recently returned from a trip to Colombia. Kim Mo-gyun has this report.
It's thought to be the first such case in Europe. The woman is said to be in her second trimester of pregnancy and was under medical supervision. She is described as being in good health, but details on the condition of her unborn child have not been released. The woman is now among the 7 people identified as having Zika in Spain. Spain's health ministry has moved to reassure the public, saying all the cases were contracted overseas. International efforts to cope with Zika are ongoing in various fields, especially in the tourism sector. Italy's largest airline, Alitalia, says it's offering a no-penalty fee for pregnant women and their fellow travelers who wish to change flight schedules or cancel their trips to countries affected by Zika. Destinations where the Zika virus has been found include Brazil and other Caribbean and Latin American countries. Korea's land ministry has also announced that pregnant passengers will temporarily be exempt from flight cancellation fees if they have tickets to Zika-affected countries. Korean Air, Asiana Airlines, and the nation's low-cost carriers will not receive any cancellation fees for flights scheduled from February 1st to April 30th. Jin Air and Tiway Air have further expanded the scope of the exemption to routes to Bangkok and Phuket, Malaysia's Kota Kinabalu, and Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
Now, staying with a Zika-related story, and with Brazil deepest in the midst of this outbreak, it now faces the challenge of preventing further spread of the virus during its annual 5-day carnival holiday that begins on this Friday. Organisers are advising tourists to be extra cautious, as the species of mosquito that transmits the Zika virus is commonly found in the districts and suburbs of Rio de Janeiro, the host city, of course, of this world-famous festival. Medical experts are concerned the annual festivities could accelerate the spread of the mosquito-borne virus globally, as an influx of around 1 million tourists is expected to party day and night at the carnival this year. Brazil is also expecting some 400,000 tourists when it hosts the Summer Olympics in August. Countries around the world have pledged more than $10 billion in aid for refugees affected by the civil war in Syria. 70 countries were represented at the London conference, including 30 world leaders. British Prime Minister David Cameron said the money would provide millions of people with life-saving food, medical care, shelter and education. Germany pledged $2.6 billion and the UK $1.7 billion. The United States will give almost $900 million. South Korea's lead officer for government policy coordination, Lee Sok-jun, who attended the conference, said Seoul would provide $12 million. The South Korean government has donated some $23 million to Syria since 2012. An estimated 18 million people have been displaced both inside and outside Syria since the conflict began some 5 years ago. Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for watching and have a wonderful weekend. And if you're watching us in Korea, do have a nice extended Lunar New Year vacation. We'll be back throughout the day though with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.